This has just come out from Kit Klarenberg. Kit Klarenberg always doing great work. Court filing exposes 9/11 cover-up. The April 2023 release of a bombshell court filing by the Office of Military Commissions, which concluded at least 2 of the alleged hijackers were CIA assets, having been recruited via a liaison relationship with Saudi intelligence. The same document offers illuminating insight into how the 9/11 Commission buried this, among other inconvenient truths. Central to the cover-up was Commission Chief Philip Zelikow. Commission investigator Dana Leisman, dubbed CS2 in the filing, told representatives of the Office of Military Commissions, the legal body overseeing the prosecution of 9/11 defendants, Zelikow consistently sought to blunt inquiries into Saudi involvement with the hijackers. Leisman was formerly charged with investigating the possible link between Riyadh and the 9/11 attacks, but Zelikow was determined she would not succeed. They're trying to cover up the connection between Saudi Arabia and 9/11, but also it was mentioned in the first paragraph that these, at least a couple of them, were CIA informants. So the CIA at minimum knew what was happening. At maximum was somehow involved, but minimum knew what was happening. He blocked Leisman's request to conduct interviews with certain individuals of interest and obtain documents that could shed light on Riyadh's foreknowledge of, if not active participation in, 9/11 and the CIA's by extension. More widely, Zelikow had exclusive control over who the commission did and did not interview and on what topics, strictly limiting which witnesses were grilled and the evidence heard. Leisman was fired by Zelikow in April 2003. Elsewhere in the filing, Bill Clinton's counter-terror czar, Richard Clarke, who has long charged that the CIA had a relationship with some of the alleged hijackers, told investigators Zelikow was explicitly selected by George W. Bush's National Security Advisor, Condoleezza Rice, to prevent damage to the Bush administration by blocking the commission's line of inquiry into the Saudi connection. The Saudi-led effort to penetrate al-Qaeda may have been organized by high-level employees at the CIA, and most of the records of the top-secret mission were destroyed in an effort to cover up the operation. Tellingly, Clarke relayed how after he expressed his opinion, the CIA was running a false flag operation to recruit the hijackers publicly. He received an angry call from George Tenet, CIA director, during 9/11. Despite his wrath during the phone call, Tenet did not deny the allegation. Initially, the Bush administration vehemently rejected mass public demand for an official investigation into 9/11. They didn't want people digging around. November 2002, the commission was begrudgingly established at long last. Its initial chief was Henry Kissinger, because there's no one more trustworthy than Henry Kissinger. But he resigned within mere weeks due to conflict of interests. Zelikow had a panoply of conflicts of interest of his own, some of which were well established at the time. Others only emerged when the commission was underway. For one, he enjoyed a long-running relationship with Condoleezza Rice. Oh, what kind of relationship? A secret report produced by Clarke's team in January 2000 concluded U.S. intelligence was ill-equipped to respond to a major, ever-growing domestic terror threat. I think that the idea that this was neglect, the idea that 9/11 was just neglect and not that they knew something and were okay with it, to say the least, to me, that seems very much like a limited hangout. Like the CIA can go, oh, it's been, 24, 25 years, so we can admit we just didn't really have our eye on the ball. And it's like a limited hangout where you go, I knew they didn't have their eye on the ball. But in fact, it was a little more than not having their eye on the ball. Clarke produced a report, this is January 2000, so before 9/11, that outlined 18 recommendations with 16 accompanying funding proposals to seriously weaken al-Qaeda. Its findings were ignored by the Bush administration. In September 2002, the Bush administration submitted a 31-page document. So this is after 9/11 now. The National Security Strategy of the U.S. to Congress. It set out a very clear blueprint for the looming war on terror. calling for a massive buildup in U.S. military spending and Washington to act preemptively against quote-unquote rogue states such as Iraq. While it bore the president's signature, the incendiary document was secretly written by none other than Zelikow. What could be the aims of allowing something like 9/11 to happen? And yes, we know it created the war on terror that killed 6 million people, but what is it the U.S. was hoping to achieve if such a thing were the case? I'm not saying it was. I would never say that they knew it was going to happen and they let it happen because they wanted it to happen. I would never say that. I'm just saying if that were the case, which is crazy and so not true, why? What would they get out of it? We'll get to that in a second. The heads of the commission, Thomas Keane and Lee Hamilton, were apparently unaware when Zelikow was appointed. The pair subsequently charged that the commission was set up to fail. And you remember 28 pages of the 9/11 commission were redacted for like 15 years or whatever it was. They came out in the late teens, 2016 or something. They were finally revealed, and they were all about Saudi Arabia. In order to do their full investigation into what happened on 9/11, the commission was initially given $3 million to complete its work. $3 million by Washington standards, even then, is like a parking ticket. That is hilarious. And Kit Klarenberg throws in here, by contrast, a probe that was going at the same time about Space Shuttle Columbia's crash, in which 7 people died, that probe had $50 million. So the probe into 9/11, $3 million. The probe into Columbia's crash, $50 million. That's a month, 3 months into the 16-month-long probe. And before a single hearing had even been convened, nothing had been convened. The probe's going on, 9/11 Commission probe's going on. They don't know, right, what it's going to say. They've not come out with any conclusions. They're barely getting into the depth of the investigation. But despite all that, Zelikow put out a complete outline of the commission's final report, meaning he already had this final report, even though they hadn't done most of the committee hearings and investigation. The finished article, released in July 2004, followed Zelikow's preordained design very closely. In the intervening time, he personally rewrote several statements submitted by staffers, which informed the report's findings. In one instance, he amended a statement to strongly insinuate, without making the direct accusation, that Saddam Hussein and Al-Qaeda had a relationship of some kind, horrifying its authors, because, of course, they didn't. Saddam Hussein had no connection to Al-Qaeda. The false claim was frequently peddled by the White House officials to justify the criminal 2003 invasion of Iraq. In October of that year, the commission determined NORAD, which coincidentally ran a training exercise on 9/11, almost exactly simulating the real-life attacks. So the commission determined that NORAD was withholding information. Investigators sought to subpoena the Department of Defense, but Zelikow intervened to prevent one being issued. The next spring, commissioners had become so frustrated that the FAA and the Pentagon officials brazenly lying to them that they mulled pursuing criminal charges of obstruction against the FAA and the Pentagon. Zelikow, again, connived to ensure that didn't happen. Despite Zelikow's obstruction, 9/11 Commission investigators uncovered several leads tying Saudi Arabia and thus the CIA to the attacks. The Office of Military Commissions filing reveals how one investigator twice interviewed radical cleric and Saudi diplomat Fahad Thumairi at government complexes in Riyadh. He was interrogated about his relationship with Nawaf Hazmi and Khalid Mindar, alleged hijackers confirmed to have been recruited by the CIA, and Omar Bayoumi, widely suspected to have been their handler. Bayoumi met Hazmi and Midar at a restaurant in Los Angeles airport immediately upon arrival in the U.S. and then struck up a close bond with them. Dana Leisman asserts the filing that the FBI had Bayoumi under investigation prior to the 9/11 attacks, and he was receiving substantial sums of money from the Saudi embassy in Washington, D.C. Before her firing, Leisman's investigation revealed Bayoumi had several no-show jobs while residing stateside. At its highest point, he was getting $3,700 a month from one of these no-show jobs with the Saudi company Erkan. Leisman was convinced that Thumairi was an intelligence officer working for the Saudi government. It was not until 13 years later, former 9/11 Commissioner John Lehman broke cover, admitting the investigation uncovered an awful lot of participation by Saudi individuals, some of them government employees, in supporting the hijackers. In ensuring Riyadh's wide-ranging involvement in 9/11 remained hidden from public view, Zelikow was very effectively insulating Alex Station, the CIA's Osama bin Laden tracking unit, which ultimately ran the operation to recruit Hazmi and Midar, if not other alleged hijackers, via the Saudis from scrutiny or consequence. Concurrently, members of the unit were assisting in Zelikow's cover-up, having been promoted since the attacks to oversee CIA's post-9/11 torture program. A lot of connections here between CIA, Saudi Arabia, and 9/11. This fraudulent narrative endures today. I mean, the fake one we get from the mainstream media, they're talking, Kit Klarenberg's talking about. It endures today, unquestioned by news outlets and much of the public. Universal mainstream omerta on the court filing's explosive contents amply indicates the 9/11 cover-up remains in place, with the media active conspirators. Since the commission report's release, Zelikow has largely faded into obscurity, the many public controversies about his role as executive director forgotten. In November 1998, Zelikow co-authored an article for the Council on Foreign Relations Journal Foreign Affairs. In it, he predicted a devastating terror attack in the U.S. in the near future, such as the World Trade Center's destruction. And he says, quote, such an act of catastrophic terrorism would be a watershed event in American history. Like Pearl Harbor, this event would divide our past and future into a before and after. What is it the U.S. got out of 9/11? Well, let's, for sake of argument, for a moment, pretend that the U.S. government had no idea 9/11 was going to happen, and then it happened. They still got stuff out of it, right? That's shock doctrine. Shock doctrine is you wait around for shit to go down, and then you use it. What did they get out of it? If whether they knew about it or didn't know about it, or had a part in it or didn't have a part in it. And what they got out of it, we know from Wesley Clark about the 7 countries in 5 years. We have invaded or destroyed or attempted to destroy all 7 of those. The only one that remains strong is Iran. All those dots connect very well to the defense of the petrodollar, to the defense of the American currency, which, if the petrodollar stopped and the U.S. dollar was no longer the reserve currency of the world, then our $37 trillion debt would mean that the U.S. dollar would be meaningless overnight if those two things stop, petrodollar and reserve currency. As I've said many times with Venezuela, just apply that same logic to these other countries. Iraq, Iran, we haven't succeeded in Iran, but the aim is the same. Syria, Libya, and there are others, but those are maybe the biggest ones. And we need, if we're looking in the 90s, you picture the U.S. ruling elite, these fucking parasite sociopaths, and they're looking at pieces of paper saying, how do we protect the petrodollar? And what do they come up with? They come up with, well, we need to make sure that these countries with a lot of oil don't drop the U.S. dollar or don't pump oil. Those are the 2 options. And in order to do that, you can try and make deals with them, right? We tried to make deals with, we made deals with Gaddafi for a little while. We made deals with Saddam Hussein for a little while. But if they start to get a little spine, if they start to think sovereignty sounds somewhat good, if they start to ally with other entities, well, then they're out of our control. Gaddafi was talking about creating a gold-based African currency and working hard to do that. The next option is collapse these countries and either take control of the oil or put in a puppet government that will not pump oil outside of U.S. dollars. And we have done that in Iraq and Libya and Syria. And with Venezuela, we haven't succeeded in collapsing them. They're strong people, and they've done an amazing job of resisting the U.S. economic war on them. But we have succeeded in stopping their oil from basically being pumped around the world outside of U.S. dollars. Then you also have the connection with Saudi Arabia. The petrodollar deal, Saudi Arabia has not re-signed the petrodollar deal, but that doesn't matter that much as long as they continue to do things the way they've been doing things, which is most of their oil is still pumped in dollars and sold in dollars. And that agreement was signed by Henry Kissinger, created by Henry Kissinger back in the 1970s. So you see this connection between Saudi Arabia, petrodollar, United States, and the countries that have to be stopped in order to defend the petrodollar. And was this a U.S. plan from the beginning to work with Saudi Arabia to create a casus belli to be able to destroy Iraq and Syria and Libya and so many others? Or was this, a plan by Saudi Arabia to fund these hijackers, and the U.S. was kind of like, wouldn't be the worst thing in the world to have a Pearl Harbor we could use? I feel like you get to choose between those two things, because the third option, the one they really want you to believe, which is the U.S. had no idea this was coming, that's kind of out the window when you have CIA informants, you have FBI informants, all as part of the hijackers. It's kind of out the window.